All right, in this video, we've got this, and this is the LSD differential out of the Mojave EXB. And if you watched the last video, you saw us put this together. Now, the thing about it is, we've done a few differential videos, but one of our members, one of our longtime members that's been with us since the membership started, Mitt Snorri, asked us to explain the difference between the LSD differentials and a standard differential. Okay, we're gonna cover that in this. This is LSD differentials 101, and in this video, we're gonna tell you what you need to know about this thing so you can figure out your own way to tune it so it works for your application, but we're also gonna cover the regular differentials and explain the basics of how you tune that as well. Hopefully this is informative, and if you're new to the hobby, welcome. Check this out. All right, now before we get down inside of this, let's get you down here and have a look at the difference between what's inside of an LSD differential and what comes in a standard one so that you know what the components are, and then we'll get into what they do. So this is the internals for the regular differential, and you'll notice that it's got the internal gears, the sun gears on the outside, and take a look at the back side of these things and the little keepers that hold all the gears in place. That's important to note for the regular differential because this is standard in most of the RCs as to how things go together. On the EXB, for example, with the LSD plates, look at all the plates in there, the different perforated units that go inside of it, and it makes a big difference having these in there. Now, the thing about that is, notice the slots and the holes in the plates. That makes a pretty big difference because of the resistance they build up when the internals spin up. And these holes also apply to the little plates that go on the internal gears as well. But take a look at the gears themselves. Notice the slots in the backside. Those work in conjunction with the holes in the plates to create that hydrostatic resistance that you need to make this system work. And how you align those plates will dictate how much resistance you get. So the three on the left, you have two friction plates and a drag plate, and how you assemble those makes a pretty big difference. Then there's the drive cups, and take a look at the difference in the shaft size between the two. The one on the left is a standard differential, but the one on the right is the LSD differential. And although they look the same from the outside, they are not the same at all. All right, so let's go over what this really does with your standard differential. Now you've got your planetary gears or you got your internal gears. These are the bevel gears in the middle, and they lock together into a cross shape. Now that's fine. But the thing about that is everything around it is smooth, even the back side of these. And these are the sun gears. Even those are smooth. So the thing about that is there's no resistance against each other. When you put it together, it turns nice and easy. Now the thing about it is back in the day, we didn't have sealed differentials in everything. We didn't. You just put a little grease in there to lube it up, and they were basically open diffs where they would just spin freely. So you don't always have to have a full diff case if you're trying to do something like freewheel your RC. That's fine if you're going to do the open diff situation. But with these ones, you can dictate, and we're going to go ahead and use this one. This is the center differential out of our Centon 6S, and we kind of ate this one because one of the bearings went bad. But it'll work for this demonstration. So we're going to use this one for that. Now it's basically the same internally. The only difference is the actual spur gear here. So this one's set up to accept the motor's input. These ones are designed to be in the housing with its own pinion. Other than that, they're pretty much the same inside. So what you have is the motor drives this section and it drives power evenly to the back and the front. When you have a light fluid in there and you add some resistance to one side, it puts the extra power to the other side. That's how that works with this. So when you take off with your RC, and what that comes out to is when you step on the throttle, it tips back a little bit. It doesn't move backwards, but the weight shifts because the tire starts to move forward. Okay, when the weight's above the tire, that's the body and all the stuff there, it's above it, it inherently leans back. That's only part of the reason it crouches. The other part of the reason is called counter rotation, and that's where the motor drives the tires and wheels, and the bigger the tires and wheels, the more the counter rotation against the chassis, which makes the front end lift because it's driving the tires forward. The counter rotation drives the chassis the other way and it tries to lift the RC. Okay, That applies to everything. That's just physics. That's the way that works. So when you apply power to this, and this is solid, in other words, you've got a really stiff fluid in here and it's really hard to turn, you're going to put a lot of power to the rear end. Now, there's a couple of reasons that that's good and bad. One, if you're trying to do stunts, backflips, and all that stuff, that's what you kind of need to do. You need to keep that power going to the rear end to get it to do what you want it to do. However, one, it does have a tendency to put more power to these parts. So this is the outdrive cup. You've got your drive axle. You've got your input cup on the other side. And when you put extra power to that, it does wear the parts sooner. Okay, that's fine. If you're willing to do the maintenance, that's cool. But if you're actually trying to outrun a buddy, here's a deal. You bring yours in, he brings his in, you throw him on the road and you go, you ready? He's, yeah, I'm ready. Okay, count to 3 and say go. We're gonna go on go, right? Okay, we're gonna go on go, right? So you're lined up on the run and everything's ready to go and you're ready to take off and he goes 3, 2, 1, go, and you pull the trigger. All right. That's where your oil comes into play. Because if he's got fairly stiff oil in his front end's going to come up in the air. He's going to have to backpedal the throttle to try and keep the front end down because you can't be fast on your rear wheels. You can't. You have to have the front end down to put the power to it, right? Okay, a thinner fluid will allow you to crouch a little, bleed off some power to the front, but keep the front end down because it bleeds the power off. So you can keep your front end down and stay on the throttle and outrun them. Okay, in that situation, a thinner fluid wins. But too thin is not a good idea. You need to find what fluid works for your application. But thinner in that situation to bleed off a little extra power, that helps. Beside that, however, look at it this way. If you can keep the front end from flipping over backwards by lightening your fluid some, when you pile into the brakes, it's counter to what we just talked about. It's exactly the opposite. So when you hit the brakes really hard, if you got thick fluid, the front tires are going to bite, they're going to hang on, and you're going to flip right over. That's what'll happen, and it'll destroy your body, and it'll make a mess, and it's fun to watch, and been there, done that, and all that cool stuff. But with a thinner fluid, when you dive on the brakes, it'll bleed a little of that energy off in the rear wheels, and it won't flip the car over so easily, and it gives you better handling in that aspect as well. So depending on what you want to do with your RC, that's the difference on the center differential. However, the front and rear are a slightly different story because now we're not going front to rear, we're going side to side. So the center differential handles front to rear, but these handle the side to side. So when you get into a corner and things shift a little bit, okay, so you come into a corner and you're turning this way, you get more weight against the right side of your vehicle or the outside as it drives into it and it lifts the inside. Okay. If you have a really stiff fluid here at that point, it's going to spin both tires and you'll lose control and you'll spin out. Okay. That's how that works in the rear. However, in the front, if you have a stiffer fluid, you can have both tires digging and turn the tires and dig to the direction you want it to go. So a stiffer fluid can work really well in the front because it allows both wheels to dig evenly. Okay, all that beside us, that's only part of it. Here's another issue. Whatever you put into, and we're gonna go back to the standard diff, I don't wanna hang on to that one. Let's look at this one. When you go back to a standard diff, and you set your fluid level up. Okay, so whatever fluids you want in here, let's say you're gonna run 100K in here. Fairly stiff, I probably have that in here right now. Fairly stiff, but not completely. Okay, that's cool. But it doesn't matter at that point. Once you put that fluid in there, that fluid keeps the same basic resistance throughout the arc of power. And what I mean by that is, even at slow speed, you feel this resistance. I can feel it right now and I'm barely turning it, okay? So with a stiffer fluid in here, you get that all the time. So now if you have a really stiff fluid in here, let's say you put 1 million in here because you want to do backflips, okay, that's cool. Whatever works for you, I'm down for that. It's fun to watch, it's fun to do. But here's the thing. If you have the super stiff fluid in this, it's super stiff always, okay? Always, it's always stiff. And what's that mean? Well, if you lock down the front and the rear together, it's like having a spool or a slipper in there. When you try and turn on traction with anything with a slipper that doesn't allow it to bleed off power to the front or the rear, it gets a lot harder to turn. Now, side to side, right? So we're still talking about a regular differential here, but this is side to side. When you go around a corner, right? You go around a corner, the outside of the vehicle in the corner turns more. In other words, the tire rotates more than the inside because it's a different arc, it's a different length. So as you go around a corner, they turn at different speeds. The outside tire turns more than the inside tire. When you have a stiff fluid in there, it'll try to drag one of the tires because if you don't have enough weight in your car to make it do it, it'll just skid one. Okay, so that makes you get out of control nice and easy. And that can be fun. It can. I'm not saying it's wrong. But if you're looking for that control, you want to have a much lighter fluid in the back to allow you to control your RC. The problem being, when you put that light of a fluid in it, you can lose the other benefits. So what you put into it for fluid dictates always in a standard differential, always. So if you put a stiff fluid in the back, okay, it's going to be squirrely. It's not going to be as fun to control. It's going to be a terrible setup. Now, I'm not going to tell you what fluid to put in it because your situation is completely up to you, but I'd go for a fairly light fluid in the back, and that gives you a little more control in the rear so it doesn't spin out when you want it to stay on track. It'll help it stay on track. Okay, in the front, however, you want both tires to dig together. I'd go for a heavier fluid in the front, but again, that's always. It's always, and I'll explain that in a second. And then I go for kind of a medium fluid in the middle so I don't bleed too much power off to the front, but I bleed off some so I don't flip over and I don't do wheelies all the time. If I want to do wheelies, I'll come off the ramp and pull the trigger. It'll go over, trust me. But at the same time, that's a standard differential, okay? Whatever fluid you put in there is always. Now, you do get a little bit of variation. When this heats up, the fluid can thin down a little bit, but not much, and it's usually not a thing. Now, I'm going to just pretend now all of a sudden we have an LSD differential here. Okay, so now this really is an LSD differential. What's the difference? What does that matter? Well, it's not always now. It's not. The LSD plates, they eliminate always. And what I mean by that is you have these plates here. And let's get the other differential out here to show you. And I'll get you some close-ups of this as we go. But you have these plates. Okay, you have your friction plates, and they look like a little snowflake, right? And then you've got, this is your resistance plate. Okay, so it's a drag plate. This one creates drag against the center gears. Okay, so you have two of these, and two of the friction plates, and one drag plate. So they sandwich up like this against this gear. So they go together like that. Okay, how you put these together makes an enormous difference within the differential itself. So each one of these, and this of course is the friction plate, each one of these has two sides. I know, that's stupid. Why do you say that? Well, because they're not the same. That's why. One side is smooth and the other side is coarse. Why is that, do you suppose? Well, I can tell you why. These are punched. So when a machine comes down and pushes the material out of the metal, it smooths the impact side and it makes it coarse on the output side where it dumps it down into the tray. So being punched parts, it gives you a coarse and smooth side. Now that has a weird benefit to it. Now these ones, these are the friction plates. When they go into the bell housing, right? These weird shapes lock into the bell housing. So these don't rotate in the bell housing. These are locked in, both of them. So you have two of them, two of these, and they're locked into the bell housing. However, the drag plate is locked to the sun gear, and they spin differently because of the rotation within. Now, the thing about that is, how you face these plates dictates the amount of traction each one has against this one, okay? So for example, if you want maximum grip between the drag plate and the friction plates, you want to have the coarse side in and the coarse side in. Now you've got that drag plate between two coarse sides, and that will be the maximum amount of torque this can take. And the way this works is they spin freely, okay? So these parts spin freely against each other. There's no resistance there. If you don't have fluid inside it, it just spins. You don't even know they're in there. What really happens is the fluid creates the resistance, and that's the beauty of this. The oil itself is what creates the resistance. It's like, if you take, and how can I put this to where it's real easy to grasp? You know what surface tension is? So on top of water, you can see those little spiders and they can run across the water and not sink in. That's called surface tension. That's because there's a certain tension within the fluid. The thicker the fluid, the more tension there is between the molecules. Okay, what happens when you line up two of these friction plates? Exactly. So let's line them up. And look at there, I can see right through them. So the holes line up. Okay, that's beautiful because that creates a pocket between the two. All right, so you got fluid that goes right through there. Now you got this one. Let's put it in there too. And you get them lined up. And here we go. And now you can see all the way through it. Okay, so each one of these holes lines up exactly with the other ones. So what? What does that do? Well, what happens is the fluid goes through there and it's got its own tension. And as that inside plate with its holes starts to rotate, the fluid doesn't want to let go of that inner plate and it holds on to it as much as it can, creating resistance. So what does that do, right? Well, it creates the resistance for the plates. The plates are attached to the differential. Okay, we talked about this, right? So the snowflake looking ones, okay, the friction plates, these attach to the actual bell housing. So that's this piece. So it attaches to that. So these are in there like so, and they can't rotate. They're stuck to that. But this actually attaches to this, which does rotate. So when you rotate these against each other, the fluid between them is what creates the resistance, which tries to slow this thing down. Okay, here's the beauty of it. You have 3 plates on one side, but you have 3 plates on the other side as well. So it works together. Now that's not all though. The internal gears, these little guys, they have plates on them too and they're textured, so it does the same basic thing. These are smaller and they have a lot less reaction, but they're also part of that system. What does that mean though? Okay, so before I tell you what it means, let's talk about how you can set these up for different levels of aggression, okay? That's a good way to put it. All right, so you have one, you have the drag plate, and you have the other. So now with the coarse sides in and the drag plate in the center, you have the most traction these can create. And you put that on both sides, it's impressive. But if you want less, then you move the drag plate to the inside next to the gear. So now it's the drag plate and 2 of the star plates or the friction plates. Now you only have resistance on one side of that plate. So that lowers the amount of resistance and how that works. Okay, but what if I want to run it open? You can't just take this out. That would be a bad idea all the way around. Now, if you check in on what they're saying online, for a lot of guys that have been playing with these things, here's their recommendation. And I haven't done this. This is what I'm told, and I'm told it works really well. So I'm going to go with this on this one. If you hook up 3 of the friction plates together like this and put them in there, they take up exactly the same space. So they don't leave slack. This keeps everything in place where it's supposed to be. It can sit right against those, and it keeps you from burning your diff up. Now I know they sell a kit. They sell a kit for that, and I bought one and I had problems getting it in. Maybe that's just me. I'm not perfect, never said I was. But this is what they're recommending online. So this is pretty cool. You'd have to buy an extra set of these friction plates, but you add one, take out the center round one, and now it doesn't touch the inner gear at all as far as resistance goes. It's a straight over thing. So now that you know what the plates do and how they're designed to work together, and don't forget, each plate has a smooth side and you can put the smooth sides in, and that lightens the amount of resistance as well. But alongside that, what fluid should you use in this? And why is it important that we even do this in the first place? Here's the reason. And this only has 10K fluid in it, and that's what it calls for this RC. And that's, of course, that one, the Mojave. Okay, so at slow speed, there's no resistance hardly. So it lets you be nimble when you're going slow. You can turn on the pavement, it doesn't eat the tires up. Everything's good because there's almost nothing there. Okay, it acts like light fluid, doesn't it? That's the way that works. Pretty nice, really. And when you put it in a car, you have more leverage because the tires are bigger, and it's hard to tell it's even in there. Here's the thing. When this spins up, okay, so like we talked about, when the front end lifts, the back end gets traction, it tries to overspin the front. What's that? So this is, let's say the back is locked down because the wheels aren't spinning. The motor's turning it this way, and I'm just pretending this is the center differential. Look at this diff. So what happens? This one's not turning. This is turning at 100%, what the motor's making it turn. But all the power's going to this one, it's turning at 200% because instead of driving them both equally, it's driving just one. So it doubles the speed. Have you ever noticed how when you get one set of tires down, you pull the trigger and you try to right it or whatever, it starts to make one tire really big? That's because the differential's allowing it to spin that one twice as fast. Most of the tires aren't designed for that, so that's a problem. But as this starts to spin, this is the magic. Now, this is where this magic is supposed to happen. As this starts to spin, those drag plates start to grip. Okay, because the faster you go, the more the oil grabs on in those plates and it adds resistance to it and it makes it drive it more evenly. Okay, so at slow speed, it works like an open diff. But at high speed, when this thing is really spinning, you got one side of your car's really, it'll throw more power at the other side to even it out because it puts drag on both sides evenly and it acts more like stiff fluid at that point. So when you start to get way out of pocket, it equalizes it. That's the idea of the LSD, because at slow speeds you're nimble, but when it starts to really spin and get out of control, it grips it and it takes care of that by equalizing the power. Think of it as traction control, but not really, because it doesn't care what you're doing when it decides to do that. It can get you out of pocket too. I don't really care for these all that much in my bigger tired vehicles, but in the Mojave, they still seem to work really well. So what would I do with this? Okay, personally, I like the 10K in the rear on the Mojave, but in my Creighton, I'd run this open. I wouldn't have any plates in there. I'd get an open one. The one that's in it right now, it doesn't have any plates. It's an open one, but it's designed for no plates. If I had to turn this into that, I would put 3 stars in each side to keep the shimming right, and I'd build it without the center, the drag plate, so that it would just be open all the time. That's the way I like the rear end. However, I would put the LSD in the center differential. So as it starts to overspin the front tires, right? So as you accelerate, it will start to overspin the front tires to start with, but when it hits a certain RPM, it'll start to throw a little more power to the rear end. And your initial dive on the brakes, it'll absorb that until it hits a certain RPM, and then it'll throw more power against it because of the LSD differentials. These are just as tough. They really are. They're just as tough, if not tougher, than the standard differentials. The teeth are big on the outside. If you keep your shimming right, they hold up forever. The internal gears are the same. They just have the plates in there. And it's all about maintenance. And I really want to touch on that for a second, because being they have so much friction and pull on the oil in there, you need to change the oil a lot more often in these, because it does burn the oil up. Oil is not perfect, it doesn't last forever, and it does break down. So you're going to need to change the oil more often in this, which is a good thing. It lets you have a look at your internals, make sure things are right. And when you put it back in the housing up against the pinion, you can make sure your shimming's good so the longevity's there. You never know. Sometimes you have to add a shim to it because things break in. The funny part of that is things usually break in before they wind up broke in. So that's just how that works. Still, at the same time, that's really the advantage of the LSD diff. Now, how you deal with your RC is always up to you. So if you haven't already, don't forget to bash that like button and help our content spread. You know, I love doing this kind of stuff. And you know, Mitt asked the question and I was happy to answer it. I hope this covered it well. You know, LSD differentials, when they first came out, I really wasn't a fan, but they do have their place, and that's what's cool. If you guys know of something that we missed on this, please feel free to get down in the comments and help others along the way. For AJ Jam Studios, I'm AJ saying, keep wrenching.